Hello, podcast listeners. We know podcasts are a great way to catch up on a program that you may have missed on KSJE, and it's provided as a free service of this radio station. But you know, KSJE is now listener-supported, and so while you enjoy this podcast, we hope that you'll also take some time to join KSJE. Become a member today. It's quite easy to do. Just go to our website at ksje.com/support and pick the level of support that best matches your budget. Thanks again for listening. Here's your podcast. 10 minutes past 8 o'clock. It's Thursday morning, the 6th day of March, 2025. Good morning, everyone. I'm Scott Michlin. Thanks for tuning in to KSJE 90.9 FM over the air right here in San Juan County, New Mexico. In Durango, Colorado, we broadcast at 103.3 FM. And if you're hearing my voice anywhere else on the planet, you've probably gone to our website to tune in. That's, of course, ksje.com. Welcome also to our viewers who are joining us this morning. The video of this program is streaming out live to the KSJE Facebook page and also to our YouTube channel. So welcome aboard, everyone. I am so glad that you are with me, because coming up in the next few moments, my conversation with local archaeologist Paul Reed and one of his other colleagues from Archaeology Southwest. We were talking about some concerns about a power project here in the Southwest that some folks think is going forward without the proper approvals and impacting negatively some Native American tribes and cultural sites in the Southwest. Stay tuned for that conversation that begins in the next few moments right here on KSJE this morning. Then, of course, we remind you to stay tuned for Mick Hess. He will be taking us roving with the arts, our weekday classical music program, right after the news next hour at 9:06 on KSJE. You can also connect with us on X and on Instagram, in addition to Facebook and YouTube. And if you're a podcast listener, you can subscribe for free to KSJE Podcast. Download them for free. They're available where you're probably already listening to podcasts, and discover a new local program that you may have missed recently. Outside our studios here at San Juan College, it is currently 48 degrees. It is mostly cloudy. We are expecting a mostly cloudy day, and we're expecting also a chance of rain or snow showers today as well. Probably about a 30% chance of rain or snow today. Tonight, again, more chances for rain or snow. There's a winter weather statement out from the National Weather Service. And then on Friday, despite what it shows on the screen, more chances for rain or snow showers, but cooler temperatures as well. And we'll see maybe little accumulation, at least in the Farmington area, but there could certainly be more at the higher elevations. I'll be back with my guests from Archaeology Southwest right after this on KSJE. KSJE is supported by San Juan Regional Medical Center. The caregivers of San Juan Regional Medical Center are committed to bettering the quality of life, health, and care of individuals, families, and our communities. Life is their sacred trust. Better is their mission. Here is their home. San Juan Regional Medical Center, improving the health of the Four Corners since 1910.
Life is all about getting from one place to another, from home to work, between school and the store. But what if you don't know exactly how to get there? That's where the Navigation Center can help. Maybe you've lost vital documents, need help with housing, or can't find a medical provider. Located inside Presbyterian Medical Services at 1001 West Broadway, the Navigation Center can help you navigate life's challenges. The San Juan County Navigation Center, connecting to resources, empowering lives.
Joining me this morning, as I mentioned, for his regular visit with me from Archaeology Southwest, Paul Reed is joining us. Paul, good morning, and thank you for being with us, of course.
Good morning, Scott. So glad to be back on.
Nice to have you with us, and you are joined by one of your colleagues, and I'm glad to introduce the Vice President for Preservation and Collaboration at Archaeology Southwest. Dr. John Welch is joining us as well. Mr. Welch, Dr. Welch, good morning.
Good morning to you and everybody.
Thank you. Thank you both for being here. And the update and the topic this morning is the SunZia Power Line, which is traversing from south of Albuquerque across southwest Arizona, I would say, southwest New Mexico, pardon me, into southeast Arizona. And Archaeology Southwest has been working with some tribes in that area of Arizona with some concerns over the route of this power line and maybe some of the things that the Bureau of Land Management did or didn't do. Dr. Welch, have I gotten that mostly correct?
You have indeed. It actually starts in eastern New Mexico and comes across. So it's 550 miles. It's a major, major installation.
Major issue, that's true. And the issue that Archaeology Southwest has kind of taken up along with some of the tribes in this area of Arizona is more of the route and where it is going and maybe where it's not going. Is that kind of the main issues or more than that?
It is. Yeah, that's exactly right. That and the fact that, the project coordinator, I guess, it's not exactly the sponsor, the United States Bureau of Land Management, has yet to make good on its obligations from our point of view and from the tribe's point of view to conduct a proper study of the impacts of the project on historic properties, meaning, places of significance in history and in culture.
And so folks that are listening to us may be thinking, well, then how are they able to build this if the approvals aren't yet done, or if there's still some opposition or some concerns about the route? Is that just getting the cart before the horse?
That's our view of it. In a nutshell, that they proceeded and authorized the construction of the project before they completed the consultative process that's required under the National Historic Preservation Act, specifically Section 106 of that.
Got you. And this has been going on for a while now. This isn't anything that has come with the new administration necessarily, because I know we were planning to talk about this late in 2024. So this has been an ongoing concern of the tribes and Archaeology Southwest for a while, correct?
That's exactly true. The project, it's hard to say exactly where the project begins, but the idea of it and the first sets of correspondence and plans date back to 2008. So from their point of view, it's been a poster child for how long it takes to get regulatory approval. By their point of view, I mean the proponent, Pattern Energy and its predecessors. From their vantage, it's a case study in the complexity of regulatory approvals through the federal government. And from our point of view, it's the issue has been that it's just a large and complicated project, and that it's never been effectively studied in the way that we've consistently asked that it be studied.
Got it. And I guess the proponents would say that this project is needed because of the demand for electricity in the Southwest and the growing communities in the Southwest, Tucson, Phoenix, California, I guess places like that. It meets a demand and a need for energy. You're not disputing that necessarily, but it's really just the actual route of the line that is of the concern, because as we will talk, it's going through some pretty sensitive and culturally sensitive areas.
That's exactly so. And, I'm an archaeologist and a person interested in geography and indigenous peoples' history and heritage and culture, not an engineer. And I don't think anybody's disputing the benefits of having energy delivered to markets. And on the other hand, I think that there are very significant costs associated with these benefits that may not necessarily balance things out. And so with that in mind, the question, I guess, or the issue from, again, our vantage is that they never did enough of the work necessary in order to establish whether or not the costs actually outweighed the benefits. The only other thing that I'll mention as regard to the need for the project is that Arizona is effectively being used as just a path. The SunZia project doesn't have the ability to shed or accept electricity along the route. And so all it really does is push energy from eastern New Mexico to central Arizona, specifically for further transmission to the California markets.
I see.
As far as I understand, and maybe this has changed, but last time I checked in and had reliable information, all of the power was being sold to the California markets, with none of it going to Arizona to make additional supply available and thereby to reduce the costs for Arizonans.
Understood. Got it. And so with this area that it goes through, then the concerns of the tribes and Archaeology Southwest, this San Pedro Valley in southern Arizona. Dr. Welch or Paul Reed, can you kind of describe that to us? There are some native populations there and some very sensitive areas there. Talk to me a bit about that path. Paul?
Well, right. And the San Pedro Valley really is one of the gems, I think, one of the treasures of southern Arizona. And, you know, many tribes have connections to it, and there's archaeology there that goes back more than 10,000 years. So this is an area of extreme concern to archaeologists like John and I and our colleagues, you know, an expanding circle, and of great concern to the tribes. And, you know, what we're talking about here ultimately, Scott, is the study of this amazing cultural landscape. And this is a term that, you know, has real specific meaning to us, to archaeologists, cultural anthropologists. The tribes, of course, it's a little different. The federal government, in my mind, has never really adequately dealt with the idea of studying cultural landscapes outside of a few really limited places. So part of the work that we've talked about before, Scott, that we do in New Mexico for Archaeology Southwest is doing cultural landscape reports and studies. So we're working on one for petroglyph. We're finishing one for Chaco that's a little smaller in scale. We're starting one for El Malpais National Monument. So our parks, in my mind, are well out in front on this. Our big land manager, who of course is BLM, with 245 million acres, BLM has it in their legislation, the act that guides their work, as well as in the National Historic Preservation Act, as John mentioned, Section 106. NEPA, the National Environmental Policy Act, talks about cultural landscapes and how to study them. So groups called for, in regards to the SunZia project years ago, for BLM to do a cultural landscape study, and that never happened. And to kind of connect this back to New Mexico, we did, you know, some small-scale cultural landscape work around Chaco with the Pueblos of Acoma and Zuni. You know, there's a large-scale Chaco Heritage Tribal Association that involved 9 New Mexico Pueblos plus Hopi. So these projects have happened in other very significant special places. And essentially this is, to my mind anyway, John certainly will chime in, one of the big missing pieces. BLM has required the company putting this in place to do spot, you know, surveys and to go down the power line corridor. Here's an archaeological site. We're going to draw a circle, avoid it. But they haven't protected the larger cultural landscape. Really the same issue we've been dealing with in the greater Chaco landscape, how to protect bigger pieces.
And that was one thing I asked you, Paul Reed, before we came on the air this morning, which was, you know, a significant comparison maybe to New Mexico. And you mentioned to me that it would be similar to trying to put a power line within that 10-mile buffer around the Chaco Canyon area. Is that kind of the same type of sensitive areas that we're talking about here in this part of southern Arizona?
Right, exactly. And I think, you know, and certainly welcome to have John chime in, you know, a largely pristine area. It's, you know, we don't talk about the San Pedro Valley as wilderness, but it has relatively few impacts. And this giant power line is a whole new level of impact to this amazing cultural landscape.
Great. Dr. Welch, could you chime in a little bit on that as well, about what this means for that landscape?
No, I think Paul has nailed it here. The route that was selected really goes right through the guts, runs parallel to one of the last and best taken care of watersheds anywhere in the American Southwest, especially one that's not under any, you know, overarching type of protected status. So it's not a Park Service piece of land or any other place that has, you know, a separate level of care that's required by the governments. Much of the land is private land and much of the land is state trust land. And so because the state trust lands in Arizona are managed in accord with obligations to generate income, it's attractive for state trust lands to host things like power lines and other industrial facilities because they pay leases and higher rates of return than land that is sitting there or is under an exclusively grazing lease. And so what the proponent did was basically thread and needle, just as Paul said, a 400 foot wide corridor connecting pieces of state trust land and private lands to be able to build this power line through an otherwise largely unblemished piece of Arizona at a time when they could have selected other routes with, more prior disturbance to them.
Right. Understood. We're watching some video right now that is from the Archaeology Southwest website of the area that we are talking about and some of the construction, I guess, that's already taken place for some of the footings and things like that in this area that you're describing. Is that correct?
That's exactly right. And now the footings are in place and so are the towers, and the lines, the power lines are going up. So they have moved very, very swiftly in order to proceed with this, despite the fact that litigation is ongoing, and over the concerns voiced by the tribes.
Interesting.
And especially, I should mention that the two most affected tribes and most concerned tribes, San Carlos Apache and the Tohono O'odham Nation.
Right. And so, Paul Reed, let me come back to you a little bit with your work that you've done with tribes here in New Mexico, as we've talked about, and had guests from those tribes here talking about Chaco and other areas like Acoma and Zuni and things like that. Is this just an idea that maybe these tribes affected in southern Arizona don't have the advocacy or the voice that these other New Mexico tribes have, and that's why there's such a struggle here to get their point across to the BLM and others in the federal government? What do you think?
Maybe, but the interesting thing, Scott, is we have Hopi and Zuni as two of the tribes affiliated to this area, and they've been hugely involved both in the San Pedro and in New Mexico concerns and projects. The other
Right.
two are San Carlos Apache and Tohono O'odham. Correct me if I'm wrong about that, John. So I'm not real sure. I mean, it's not as big a coalition, in New Mexico for Chaco. We had all 19 New Mexico Pueblos plus Isleta del Sur down near El Paso joining in, plus Hopi. So, a slightly bigger coalition. But I think, I don't know. I mean, the San Pedro Valley, as the film showed and John's talked and many of our tribal partners have talked, is an amazing landscape. But I think there might be a bit of a visibility issue as well, because as John said, BLM land, state trust lands, some private lands, but not at that national park or national monument status. And so those have been the areas, for energy development historically. And of course, some of our monuments as well have some of these issues, but it's these big swaths of land that have barely any federal protection beyond what we have at the National Historic Preservation Act and the National Environmental Policy Act, or NEPA. So yeah, it is an interesting issue.
Right. Well, yeah, it seems to be. And so, Dr. Welch, you mentioned the route that this is taking, of course, and going through some of these pristine areas. And I would imagine there have been some other routes proposed, but obviously that hasn't seemed to have been followed. But are there some other potential routes that could have taken place that have taken this power line through either more developed areas or less sensitive areas or things like that? I imagine it may have added to the cost, and maybe that's part of the issue. Who knows?
Well, one of the problems from our point of view is that there was never a clear comparison that was transparent and publicly available. We never saw the supposed, cost-benefit analysis for the selection of alternative routes. We think, and the tribes advocated for, the use of routes that paralleled I-10. This
the interstate
goes the same place as I-10 goes. And so why didn't they give greater consideration to making use of the existing industrialized corridor? We don't know whether it cost more. The proponents said it did, but the proponents said a lot of things about this project.
Sure. And so as this goes to the courts, I guess, what is the latest? We're looking at the Archaeology Southwest website right now with some of the latest updates that have just been updated this week, as a matter of fact. And so I imagine this is going through the courts, albeit slowly.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And slowly, of course, is almost always the operative word. It's on appeal for the Ninth Circuit. There was 2 lawsuits filed last year, one in a state system and one in the federal system. The state system pointed out that the proponent, Pattern Energy, had agreed in the process of securing the certificate of environmental compatibility from the Arizona Corporation Commission, had agreed to conduct the cultural landscape study that we've been talking about. They said, we are going to do this prior to construction in order to satisfy our obligations to the state of Arizona and the Arizona Corporation Commission. But they never did that. And so we pointed this out to the Arizona Corporation Commission. They said, well, that's interesting, but it doesn't stop the project. We couldn't figure out why, so we pressed the matter legally. The final response from the Arizona State process was that because the case was also in federal court, that they were not going to rule on it. That didn't make any sense to us because it's a different set of facts and a different set of law involved in the federal case. And the federal case, now under appeal in the Ninth Circuit with oral arguments scheduled for later this month in Phoenix, is that, just as you mentioned, the BLM put the cart before the horse. They claim that the NEPA process, the National Environmental Policy Act process that concluded with the environmental impact statement and final environmental impact statement, FEIS, and decision of record was the final agency decision, even though the National Historic Preservation Act had not been completed. And from our point of view, it had actually been started because the cultural landscape study wasn't done. All they did was analyze this corridor, 400 foot wide, and then dodge, as Paul said, the individual places of special significance without attending to its landscape scale impacts. So what this means is that our argument has been and is that they should and must conduct a broader landscape study, and that the approval wasn't granted until they issued the limited notice to proceed for the construction itself. So because the tribes and Archaeology Southwest had been told that National Historic Preservation Act was still in process, and that our concerns were welcome and that they were working hard to address concerns with historic properties and places of significance, that we believe that the matter was still under consideration. But when we asked them for additional consideration before they issued the construction, they said no, that the approval was done. So that left us with little choice except to go to the courts, and we still hold that they improperly authorized and prematurely authorized the project before the completion of the National Historic Preservation Act process.
Got you. And to be clear again, and I think we mentioned this earlier in the program, that Archaeology Southwest is kind of a party to these legal issues, but it's really the tribes that are taking the foreground and taking, I guess, taking this to these courts, and you guys are also just tagging along and offering support.
Yeah, that's right. We've provided technical assistance and support to the tribes to make sure that they had the benefit of our knowledge of the San Pedro Valley. But the lead litigants are the Tohono O'odham Nation and the San Carlos Apache tribe.
Gotcha. Very interesting. And there's been no injunctions or no attempts to just freeze or stop the construction, or that have been upheld, I guess, by any court.
That's exactly right. We have done everything that we could legally and administratively, and now we are awaiting the opportunity to argue the matter before the Ninth Circuit in Phoenix later this month.
Got you. Okay. I think I understand, but this is why I'm not a lawyer.
It's kind of an amazing thing for a citizen and a concerned citizen to try to pay attention to the complexities of litigation that determine so many of the aspects of our lives and the way that our world is treated and the way that the environment is taken care of or not taken care of. It's a very, very difficult thing to try to understand and one to follow.
Certainly. Well, and just following along today, I can understand that for sure. And for these tribal governments and tribal peoples, Paul Reed, this is unfortunately not a new story, I don't think. There have been certainly examples of similar things happening throughout history. Somewhat discouraging, I guess, to see it happening in 2025. But is that something that kind of gives you flashbacks too with some of your previous work? See this happening now?
Definitely, Scott. One of the big things facing indigenous nations, well, not just in America, but across the world, is the loss of their lands, the loss of their tribal lands, the loss of lands that were shared and held collectively with other tribes, the commons, of the Old English concept. And many of these lands have become public lands in America, in the West. BLM, Forest Service, many of our parks and monuments were carved out of lands traditionally held and used by tribes. And of course, the entire continent, to state the obvious fact, pre-arrival, 1492, was in indigenous hands. And through time, the lands have been chipped away at, in this accumulative process that has left the tribal nations devastated. So, what we try to do at Archaeology Southwest, and what John has been so important for us to have on staff, along with Skylar Begay and other folks down there, is we try to elevate those tribal voices, get behind different projects, bring the archaeological expertise, and do our best to bring the tribal elders, the indigenous elders, into the mix, in ways that they're comfortable with, to talk about why these places are so special to them. And it's not like these are things that, for the tribes, it's not like all Americans, well, we honor these are amazing national parks or stretches of public lands. It's like, no, these are ancestral landscapes that the tribes have used and still have in their songs, their prayers, their dances. So I think it's really important for our audience to understand that there is great continuity in our part of the world between modern tribes, the way they practice their religion, their lives, their social lives, their political lives, and these landscapes that surround them, but which are not under their own tribal lands and tribal control anymore. And that's a huge part of all this.
Right, and that was one of the things that you taught me, Paul Reed, in one of our previous discussions, was the connections to these modern-day tribes to even places like Chaco Canyon and things like that they feel certainly a strong cultural connection and historical connection to that very site, to that landscape, to that area, and they have for years, and that is something that's still very, very important to that tribal culture, not just one tribe, but numerous tribes and pueblos, correct?
Right, exactly. These places that a lot of Americans look at as abandoned, left behind, we use the word ruins sort of carelessly. I mean, that's the way it strikes us. These are not ruins. They are living places. They're living landscapes to indigenous peoples, and they continue to care for them, even once those passed and have passed from tribally held lands or, quote, unclassified, unassigned lands into different statuses of federal or state lands. Tribes return to their ancestral lands all over America to do pilgrimages, to make offerings, and to keep those amazing connections alive. And, again, that's just something that I can't emphasize enough for our audience.
Definitely, right. And so in this area is similar in that significance that Chaco would be to tribes and pueblos that we're more familiar with maybe in New Mexico. This area holds a similar significance to these tribes in Arizona.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
Dr. Welch?
I was going to say exactly so. As a matter of fact, the Archaeology Southwest was the primary sponsor for an investigation that brought the most knowledgeable members of the 4 tribes that care the most about the San Pedro Valley, the San Carlos Apache tribe, the Tohono Hopi, and Zuni, all to the San Pedro Valley back in the early 2000s, and brought their historians, their cultural experts into the valley in order to learn more from their vantage about the importance of the place in their cultural and heritage traditions and ways of looking at and understanding the past. A book was published by the University of Arizona Press on exactly this project, and its name is important. History is in the land. History is not written in books for many Native peoples. It's embodied in landscapes themselves. And that's why these cultural landscape studies that we've been talking about are so important, because they are the bridge between geographical and academic and practical and spiritual understandings of places and living peoples. And so simply doing what the BLM and the proponent has done and doing archaeological studies of 20 different spots along hundreds of miles of power line corridor does not bring forward the range of significance and importance of the landscape for Native peoples or for existing living non-Native occupants and people who care about the landscapes.
Sure. And so we just have a couple of minutes remaining this morning, gentlemen, to talk about this topic. And I guess, Dr. Welch, can you give us kind of an idea of what's next? Is it just a kind of a standoff at the courthouse? You mentioned that there is maybe another court hearing or update next week, perhaps, or next month?
It's later this month. I'm blanking on exactly what the date is. I'm going to say it's the 20th, though, of March.
In Arizona.
It's the 26th in Phoenix is the hearing. Oral arguments. The parties will appear in the Sandra Day O'Connor Courthouse in downtown Phoenix and plead to the courts their cases. And then the court will take those pleadings along with the written briefs under advisement and issue a ruling as to whether or not the plaintiffs are correct, that the BLM placed the cart before the horse and improperly authorized the construction of this power line, or whether or not the respondents are correct, that the final environmental impact statement was the last opportunity for the tribes and Archaeology Southwest and others to appeal.
And so when that happens, what do you expect, I guess, from either ruling? Would that then, I guess, if it goes the way for the tribes, would that mean that some of this work has to be pulled out and the landscape restored, or is that still another legal battle after that?
It's a fine question, and I think then things would get very interesting in terms of the negotiations between the tribes and Pattern Energy, finally bringing them to the table in a meaningful way to talk about the landscape level impacts of this landscape level project.
I see. But this, to me, the way you describe it, sounds like it would be a significant legal decision in this long-standing dispute over the project. Is that how you see it as well, this ruling?
We would very much like to see not just the BLM, but other federal agencies take more seriously the landscape level effects of their landscape level undertakings and projects.
And Dr. Welch, before we go, just real quick, with your job at Archaeology Southwest, this is the type of thing that you are involved with? Do you have other situations like this in other parts of the country, or is this probably the one taking most of your efforts and attention?
I'm very grateful to report that this is the only litigation project that we are actively involved in, and we would prefer not to be involved in any litigation project. It's incredibly costly, both in terms of time and staff level of commitments. And, we don't want to be on the other side of the table or the other side of the courtroom from federal agencies or the proponents of projects. We want them to follow the laws and listen carefully and attentively to what tribes have to say about their projects, and then to respond, to seek ways, just as the rules say, to seek to accommodate and reach agreement with the tribes and the other parties about ways to conduct these projects and do so with minimum impacts on places of exceptional history and culture like the San Pedro Valley.
Got it. But it seems like to me this issue has raised to the level of demanding your time and attention and I guess financial resources because of its importance.
Well, because of our long involvement in the San Pedro Valley and because of this book that was written, our sponsorship for it, our close connections with the communities, both indigenous and non-indigenous, the tribes, as well as others who live along the San Pedro Valley, we couldn't really turn our backs on it. We've been doing research and doing outreach and sharing information and perspective about the importance of this really, truly extraordinary part of the American Southwest for 25 years now. And so we couldn't just sit idly by and say, oh, gee whiz, it seems like once again the federal government has made a not so good decision. It didn't seem right. Understood.
Dr. John Welch and Paul Reed from Archaeology Southwest, thank you both for your time this morning and talking about this really important issue with our audiences today. Thank you.
Thank you, Scott. Thanks, Paul.
Thank you, Scott.
Thank
Appreciate the opportunity.
You're welcome, both of you. Thank you very much. My guest this morning with me here on KSJE. KSJE and the San Juan College Native American Center present the Student Study Tip of the Week.
Hi, this is Marianne, coming to you with your study tip for the week. Ask for help. If you really don't understand a concept, ask questions. Stop by your professor's office during their office hours or contact classmates and professors via email. Some classes might even have a Facebook group to keep students engaged and create an environment to ask questions outside of class. Either way, your professors will be on your side, non-judgmental, wanting to help you understand their class in the entirety.
The Student Study Tip of the Week is presented by the San Juan College Native American Center and KSJE. Did you enjoy that podcast? We hope that you did. And if you did, share it with your friends. And if you really want to keep podcasts like this coming, please support KSJE. You can do it easily online at ksje.com.